All right, we're back for the Sapien podcast. We're here with Dr. Lida Fatima. How do you say your last name? I don't want to say it wrong.
Fatemi. Fatemi.
Fatemi.
Almost right.
Almost right. I stopped. Dr. Lida Fatemi and of course Dr. Gary. How's it going?
How's it going, Brian? Lida, thank you so much for being on with us. Uh, we've had Lida on before. We're so excited to have her back. Me and Dr. Lida have been friends for a really long time. She's one of the smartest people I know. She's an amazing healer. She practices in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and has quite an interesting practice. We talked a lot about mental health, physician wellness, so many topics on the last visit. But I think on this one, we're really going to dive into mental health as it's become such an issue. Lida, tell everyone a little bit about yourself, maybe some things I didn't mention, and then we could get into the message.
Sure. I'm a hospitalist. So I specialize in adult medicine, 18 and up. And I specialize in very sick adults who cannot go home. So they have to be hospitalized, inpatient, and we take care of them. Some of them go to the ICU, some of them end up going home, and some of them never make it out. So I deal with very, very ill patients. My perspective is um, within the system, very deep in it.
Yeah. And one of the things it's kind of evolved over really like the last few years of our friendship is a real interest in mental health, right? It
Yeah.
seems like that's kind of where your career is headed. I know before we get into it, like how did that happen? Was mental health and kind of spirituality and focusing on one's, you know, mind and body and spirit axis, if you will. Is that something that's always been a part of your life, or has that sort of evolved over your career?
That's a great question. I started a spiritual path when I was 12 through my parents. It's a path of self discovery, and I'm so grateful to have been a part of it. So meditation's been a part of my practice since age 12. I used to meditate for an hour and a half in high school when I was very depressed, right? In coming to America from Iran when I was 14. And it just evolved over time. I kind of lost touch with it through college and medical school and residency some, and then came back to it at the end of residency when I had my own burnout issues, and then I recognized through being, a chief resident and being involved in the resident union how terrible it is across. It's not just like, hey, one doctor is saying I'm having an issue. It's pretty much all doctors in all systems. And that sparked my interest. I was interested in psychiatry when I was in medical school. That was actually my absolute favorite rotation. And I wanted to do it, but I just didn't think that I was going to be able to survive. You know what I mean? Myself, like being able to be healthy. Um, and yeah, so this interest has gone on for a long time now. It keeps showing up. It keeps showing up to a point of, it feels very much aligned with who I am and what I want to achieve because we have such a lack of it, especially right now. Especially right now.
Well, that's what we wanted to talk today about specifically. Is the last 2 years have been very intense for a lot of people in many ways, but there's a certain repercussion that not many people are talking about or realizing. And maybe you could jump in about that because you've written a whole book on it and we'd like to know more.
Yeah, totally. My interest, really peaked when mid-pandemic, I started seeing in our hospitalized patients a very high rate of suicide attempts, substance use to like extreme, right? I'd never seen the combination of things that people are taking, like a fentanyl pill plus LSD plus heroin plus weed. You're like, what is going on? Meth. And so I thought, okay, maybe this is just our population in New Mexico, because we do have a very poor population. Heroin and meth are really big here, and I was, at the time I was a leader in the hospital for documentation. So I asked my crew to look up the highest DRGs, the top 5 DRGs, which are the most common principal diagnoses that we admit patients with. And previously it was like sepsis. It was, brain injury. We're a trauma center of New Mexico. So of course those things make sense. Fast forward to mid-pandemic, like 2021, and the top 5 DRGs are now, sure, the respiratory illness from COVID, number 1. And then number 3 is like alcoholic hepatitis and hepatorenal disease and death from it, from alcohol. Number 5 is multi-substance use disorder and suicide attempt. And it wouldn't stop. It was month after month after month because I was educating the residents on this. So I really had holding the pulse on the diagnosis that we were seeing. So that really, caught my attention. And, I was doing a podcast on Reset MD, which is a podcast started with me and 3 other physicians across the states, talking about these issues with physicians specifically. And the person I was interviewing was Dr. Strickler, who is the child abuse specialist of the state. And she sees the worst of the worst, right? So I'm sharing this with her just as I'm sharing it with you guys. And I'm like, hey, Leslie, what are you seeing pre-pandemic, mid-pandemic? What are you seeing in your, kid population? Because I thought, the adults that I'm seeing have to relate to the kids somehow. They're the parents, right? I thought, sure, mental health for the kids are worse, probably abuse is high. And she goes telling me that there is a huge uptick in the number of child torture cases. I paused. I'd never heard the term before, ever. Not in medical school, not in residency, not from my pediatric colleagues, not, And so I stopped. I was like, what? And so she explained to me that is the repetitive, malicious, intentional acts of, I don't even want to know. I don't really want to think about it. That's why I'm not a pediatrician or in any field that touches kids. I can't handle it. And she said that pre-pandemic, they were seeing 1 to 2 cases per year, to the point that it was so rare, it was a medical anomaly, and there would be case reports written about it. Now, fast forward to mid-pandemic, they're seeing 1 to 2 cases of child torture per month. That's a 12-fold increase in the numbers. So for me, that day I was like, okay, we have to do something for mental health. And, fast forward to my own traumatic experience that I wrote about. That's the book called the Gag Order, My Story of Becoming. It was a very traumatic event that happened to me. It was a fraudulent case that I was the victim of. And it was very intricate and very smart. They said, oh, you missed a court date as an expert witness, and your medical license is on the line. And they were very detailed about my information, which I was like, oh, this is the law. And I had numbers checked and all of that. And I was like, oh my God, they check out. Like, what is this? And they asked me I have to bail myself out. So you'll read the story. It's a whole thing. And I go really deep with it, with my own vulnerabilities and emotional, dealing with my emotions throughout the trauma. Recognizing that the violators were most likely had traumatic events in their life that were never resolved, right? And so you want to project that onto others, just like these parents who have most likely had their own traumas in the past as children or as adults, but they just don't know how to deal with it, and they project it onto their kids. And so that really, this traumatic event for myself and resolution of it within myself really solidified my want to start the End Child Torture campaign. And so that's when it all came to me. I was like, okay, I have to do this. And what are we looking at the future of the planet when we have a 12-fold increase in severe mental health disorders that are coming, right? All of our kids are going to be growing up with these kids. And what does that mean for them? What does this planet look like when you have individuals who have had such severe trauma that all they know is horror, right? Um, so that's what this is really about. That I've started, and yeah.
Is that
So
so? Is it because these family? I mean, they're on lockdown and they're just stuck at home, and the kids have no way out. They can't tell a teacher. Is that what's going on?
Yeah. So isolation that year where there were no in-person schooling, these kids were isolated. There was no safety net. And these kids, used to be seen by teachers, used to be seen by the neighbors, used to be seen like at the grocery store, whatever it was. They were reported, parents were reported they were getting some care as opposed to none, which happened mid-pandemic. And so that's really absolutely what's happened. And then, they came out and now everybody's like, oh my God, what is happening with this child? Um, yeah.
it seems like to me, and I know we talked about it in the very beginning. Really, the three of us did. Uh, that this was inevitable. That when you take such a sort of, in my opinion, inappropriate approach to handling the pandemic, the side effects were always going to be worse than the infection. And
100%.
in the very very beginning, maybe for like the first few months, okay, we had to kind of see, but the writing was on the wall especially when it came to the risk for children, right? As far as the infection itself. And so the alarming part to me is not only did that year of isolation is not reversible, we're going to have to deal with these ramifications for the rest of this generation of children. And what really worries
And
me,
more to come. Yeah. Because
and
they're going to grow kids.
they're gonna have, and we're still not letting kids go to school. We're still not letting kids take their masks off. There's still arguments, at least in certain states. And I think one of the important messages that I want people to take from this podcast, and I still have so many questions for you about your project and your book, but it's really that you can't be so short-sighted. You can't just, think about one problem and create 100 other problems.
Right.
And the mental health issues in this country, we've talked about it time and time again, they're not bad, they're terrible, they're alarming, and our system is completely incapable of doing anything meaningful. Like, it's really true, and I see it in my clinic, and I know you see it in your hospital. And I think that the message, especially about the trauma these children had, it's obvious. And to see the
Yeah.
data is so alarming. So
So alarming.
can you tell us a little bit about the campaign, and then we'll get into the book, because I think they're two separate things. It sounds like you're using this book as a platform to really create awareness for the campaign, but I think the the real horror is the reason why the campaign exists. So tell us, like, just real, like, kind of wrap it up again. What is the campaign?
Mhm.
Who started it? When did it start? What's the goal?
Sure, sure, sure. I started the campaign at the end of January, beginning of February, for this reason, because I saw that the violence that continues on is going to continue on if we do nothing about it, right? We have a choice. And once, like for me, I became aware that this problem exists. I'm like, we have to do something about it, right? So the campaign, what the process is that yes, I'm using the book as a means to fundraise, is really what I'm doing. Because I hate asking for money. Like, that's just not
Mhm.
something I'm good at or interested in. So I'm giving, people a writing that is very deep, and I've gotten incredible reviews on. And I know people who buy it will gain something or many things from it. There are so many gems in it that are implanted with complete honesty. And so that's the book. And 25%, which is unheard of in in this realm of nonprofit, and I'm not even a nonprofit and I'm doing this, or the for-profit world, to give 25% of your sales to a campaign, So I'm really fundraising for this cause. What we will be doing is, after the kids are identified in the child abuse specialist clinic, they get hooked into psychotherapy, therapy, counseling, and we're going to handpick these people because I'm looking for excellence, I'm looking for passion, and I'm looking for expertise. These kids, our kids, the next generation of humanity, deserves the absolute best. And just because they can't afford, or their parents can't afford to put them in therapy, does not mean that they shouldn't be getting excellent care. And so they're going to get hooked into the community, where either hiring people or just paying people to, hey, these are the kids that you're going to see if you would, and they're paid for. The other prong to this is taking care of the adults in these families, right? These are the adults who have severe issues themselves and they just cannot get out of it, and some of them really do, right? Now, even let's say 30% of them or 50% of them sign up and say, yes, I want to do something about this. This sucks. I'm suffering, my family's suffering, and I want to do something about it. Then we're going to be able to put them in rehab. We're going to be able to put them into, give them resources that they need. And some of them, it's literally just a lack of a community, form communities so that they can come together. And you know what? As a parent, I have two kids. I have a 17-month-old and a 13-year-old. And I have all the support in the world. I have my parents, I have an incredible husband who takes care of them. We have neighbors. There are so many people in America specifically that have none of that. They have no one to go to. The parents are working 3 jobs each, trying to make ends meet. They come home, they still don't have food, or the electricity is gone, and the kid is screaming. There's no one, no neighbor, no family member to go to and be like, hey, can you please take the baby for 30 minutes so I can just wrap my head around the misery that I live in, right? And so they don't have that. And especially during isolation, well, you're going to end up beating your kid, period. And I understand the depths of that as a parent. Like, when your kid is screaming for hours, a sane human goes insane, let alone someone who's teetering at, without support. Then it's an explosion, explosion over explosion. And then it's really hard to gather yourself and bring yourself back into a centered space if you don't have life practices that center you every day. And that is a huge, huge, huge piece that we miss in our human life currently. And I love that you guys are working on that, is lifestyle. It's about lifestyle medicine. It is lifestyle that matters the most. It's what I call them, is what I've developed through my coaching practice, is conscious life practices that I abide by to the T every single day. And when I don't, I go through my checkbox. I'm like, what did I miss in the past 2 days? So, and that I feel unbalanced when I'm not practicing. And it takes practice, and it takes consistency, and it takes work. And with this campaign for the adult population and for the kids, is to teach them these conscious life practices, so that they have it forever. And so when things aren't happy, then they can go back and be centered again.
That's really great. Yeah, I love the lifestyle approach. And I just want to take a break to just tell people where they can download this book, so that just mid podcast, just press pause, download it. It's not an expensive book, but it's a valuable read, and it's a valuable income for the cause.
$5.95. A high school student can buy it. There's a
Yeah.
reason I priced it as such.
Where can they
And
find it?
where?
Give everyone.
What, Gary?
Where can they find it specifically?
So endchildtorture.com is the website. And the first thing you see on the website is the book. You can just check out. And, I've had so much support. So many people have bought multiple copies to give to other people. And there's been so much great feedback on it and reviews on it. It's been very interesting hearing, a lot of my core people reading it and coming back to me like, oh my God, wow, this is my story that you've written. And so it's been really cool. There's a lot of mirrors that I've placed in the book, that are very honest. It's really mirroring myself, and I'm looking at myself from many different angles. But yeah, that's where you can find it. And what we're trying to do is our target is to sell 1 million copies by April 1st. I know we're shooting for the moon, but we're going to do it. Um, and with that, that's going to give us enough funding so that we can start the efforts by July. So April to July, we can form structures, because right now we have no structures, if you can imagine that. And I dug into that. For the state of New Mexico, a previous governor actually took out all the funding out of psychiatric medicine, all of the funding, because of one doctor who did Medicare fraud, maybe, but she wanted to use that money for her pocket or whatever, right? There's politics when they get involved in science or in helping people, then, it just never ends well. So yeah, that's what we have in New Mexico. And you're absolutely right, Gary. Like in the 1970s, I think it was when, mental health just folded, just gone, nationally, where we had housing for the homeless, and for those who had mental health issues and psychiatric illness, they just gone, and they ended up all on the streets. And that's, these are the issues we're really like, it's in our face today.
You know, the focus on conscious, let's say your term is
Life
beautiful,
practices.
conscious lifestyle practices.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think to me, you know, the reason, one of the main and this is just a thought, the reason why we're failing in managing our mental health is because the actual healing, the actual therapy, the actual way to make a meaningful intervention is lifestyle medicine, right? When we say meditation, when we say therapy, um, even if you think about psychedelics, because they're not a daily, they're like a once a year, or like you go through a series and then like you're done with it. It's really
Mhm.
an experiential thing. It's a lifestyle thing. And if you think about it, it's just basically like, it's not lucrative. You can't make a bunch of money doing lifestyle medicine. Maybe a few people in the world can if you get enough attention. But as a health industry, as like a hospital or a pharmaceutical company, there's no money to be made in it. So feel like mental health has gone kind of thrown to the side because it's just not lucrative. And
Right.
you're with the pandemic, it's just put such a huge lens on this problem, and
Mhm.
we're starting to see in the general media talking about, these cases. So I've seen a bunch of articles recently talking about these children that are being tortured, talking about the side effects of the lockdowns or the masking, or just the kind of authoritarian rules that are made and no wiggle room for kids that have illnesses, kids that have mental health stuff that
Mhm.
can't wear a mask, and no understanding, just authoritarian approach. And so, I think our message that started long before the pandemic of lifestyle intervention as opposed to pharmaceutical intervention is even
Mhm.
more important. I think, having this is another important issue that I want to bring up is I am so grateful for our community, like the low carb sort of, ancestral health community, because there's so many people stepping up to the plate bringing lifestyle medicine practices, but they're mostly not doctors. And I
Mhm.
think that it's so important. We were just having a conversation with Dr. Sean O'Mara about it, and we're going to have him on the podcast and we're going to get into it. If you're going to make a dent in mental health management, if you're going to make a dent in chronic medicine, in chronic medical disease processes, obesity, diabetes, all this stuff, it has to be physician driven, because
Mhm.
in general, it's hard for people to get behind a guru. Some people can, but a lot of people won't do that. Health coaches, people will create a community around it, but to get like a really big wave of support for these kind of
Mhm.
interventions, it has to be driven by physicians. So, something me and Brian are really focusing on is getting physicians on the podcast like yourself and giving them a voice. And
Totally.
I used to be upset with my colleagues that, oh, you're not speaking up, and now I'm like trying to be encouraging, like, let's go, guys. So many of our colleagues really agree. They're just afraid. It's a really
That's it.
constrained healthcare system. So, you know, writing a book about your personal struggles. It's so powerful, Lida. And I know you have other books in the wing and some of
Yeah.
our favorite subjects, which if you want to mention, you can. But I mean, I really think that it has to be a physician driven change, and influencers and scientists like Brian are so important to give us platforms.
Absolutely.
But it has to be more doctors in this. I don't
Right. I totally agree. I totally agree. And I think, um, number one, I think there is a rise in the number of physicians who are recognizing that self-care is extremely important, in your mental well-being. Mindset is extremely important in well-being, and I see that rise, and with that we will start seeing more and more of this kind of a talk, lifestyle medicine or conscious life practices is what I call, instilled within our education system, because these physicians are also teaching medical students, teaching residents, right? Now, we're moving, but at a very slow pace. And I think the conversations we're having are going to even, push all of this further faster, which is what we really need. The other part that you mentioned, we are under the gag order, which is the suppression order, right? It's a global gag order, and that's what I bring in the book, that authoritarian, forceful. I lived in a theocratic regime, under a theocratic regime in Iran, and I understand what it means to be censored, to be truly censored, where you disappear. Like, you say something that people don't like in the government and you're gone. It is not a joke. So I grew up with that, and then thinking, and then, in my medical training, the same thing. And you can't speak against pharmaceutical companies. You can't. And I'm not speaking against anyone. It's just the world we live in. This is the world we've imagined to be, and we've agreed upon it. Unfortunately, fortunately, it's just part of the human journey as of right now. There's actually a book that I recommend people reading who are listening, is called The Four Agreements. By Don Miguel Ruiz. He brings in Toltec wisdom of, ancient wisdom, and shares that. And it's absolutely incredible. And it talks about some of what we're talking about. I think your audience would enjoy it. But yeah, this forcefulness and authoritarianism is not intuitive. In fact, it's against intuition. And when it is, we have to really be like, hey, do I need this or do I not? And move on. Instead of perpetuating it as we have, with masking that doesn't work, with vaccinations. Vaccinations, fine, right? I'm fine. I'm vaccinated. I'm fine with it. But why are we focusing more on the immune system? Why aren't we focusing on, hey, get sunshine and fresh air? That's how we live our life. And we got COVID, and it was, it was 2-3 days of having, okay, fatigue and sore throat and all of that. It was mild disease, but any cold virus, rhinovirus, the parainfluenza, like all of that would give me the same symptoms. The flu would be worse than what I got with COVID, 100%. And I'm vaccinated for the flu too. You know what I mean? We have to be every year for the hospital. And so I really do believe that as we pay more attention to what really does work with lifestyle, we will find the money in it too, you know? And that's, it's kind of like steering a ship that's been, we've agreed for it to go in a certain direction. Now we're saying, hey, let's all agree to envision a global change for all of us that goes this way. And the money exists for everybody out there who's trying to make millions of dollars. There's millions of dollars in anything. Just, it's our belief, it's our collective imagination, collective want of, hey, this is much better and this is what I want, instead of popping pills that make me much sicker.
Absolutely.
I
Why don't
love
go, Gary? Do you want to go?
No, you got it, man. Sorry, guys.
Well,
I have a little bit of feedback in my mic, so me and Brian are struggling a bit. So sorry for that.
well, yeah. No, I just want to bring it back to the topic at hand, and just like what is the money going to go towards, and what can people look forward to and follow, and is it just going to be in New Mexico? And is your colleague Dr. Leslie, I believe, was that just in her hospital that she saw that, and are we seeing that across the board in the US?
That's a what great question. So the money, and then Dr. Strickler. Okay, the money is going to go to creating infrastructure, right? It's going to take a pretty substantial amount of money to create infrastructure where, yes, I have these kids, in Dr. Strickler's office, she she was telling me how she trained an NP to give, psychiatric help to these kids, and the NP left to another job that pays more, right? And so my idea is, hey, there are already people in the community that are doing this work. They're just, these kids don't have the funding to make it to those community healers, as like psychiatrists, therapists, healers, and we would pay for them through the campaign for these kids to get help for as long as they need it. As long as they need it, they get it. Same thing with the adults. With the adults, I'm envisioning having a 6 month um, program for them where they have the psychotherapy, spiritual practices, and conscious life practices instilled, plus, if they choose to, an option enrollment in a clinical trial for psilocybin that we would be working with my institution. And I'm doing all that footwork. There's a lot of work that's gone into this already, hundreds of hours, hundreds of hours. So the Brain Injury Substance Use Disorder Center at UNM is very interested to work with me on this. So that's where the money would go for the research and for giving help. Um, um, your second question was about Dr. Leslie Strickler. She is actually one of the first child abuse specialists in New Mexico. I think actually nationally, she's one of the first. She has formed, I believe, a fellowship for it, and she's the medical director for it. So she's very well known here in this realm and very active. When she saw the uptick in the numbers in New Mexico, she reached out to the national listserv that they have for the child abuse specialists of in America, and they were seeing exactly the same thing, which is so crazy, right? So my vision is, hey, let's figure out the process here locally, because I have my hands in it and I can get dirty with it. Once I understand what it's going to take and what it really means and create the structures and all the things we need, then we can model that for other states. This is not to say, like, we can't start doing things in other states. Of course not. But I just, I'm only one person and I have limited
Yeah.
energy and time.
No, I like
Uh,
that. I like that plan. No, I like the plan of you figure it out in one state and then try to magnify it. But also, can people reach out on the website, the endchildtorture.com, and connect with you if they're
yes.
a physician in another state?
Absolutely. Please do. If you have any ideas, I'm happy, happy, happy to hear your ideas. Or if you want to just be like, hey, let's get together and do this together, I'd be so happy. If you have any expertise in setting up a nonprofit, yeah, even if you don't want to give money or buy the book, or if you buy the book and you want to give more money, because I've had these scenarios come up in the past couple of weeks. I've had people who wanted to give a lot of money, and then and instead they bought a bunch of books, like they bought 20 books, and I'm like, that's awesome. I'm just not a nonprofit yet. I'm working on that status so that people who want to give thousands, they can, but I have to have that status first. So if you have expertise in that realm, that can be your contribution. Your donation of time and energy and expertise is would be wonderful. And yes, through the website, you can reach me. It's info@endchildtorture.com. You can reach me through that. You can reach me at lidafatemi@gmail.com. Um, if you just have questions, or if you try to download the book and it's not working, just shout out, out there. It's like pop-up blockers may be up, and that's what's happening. But reach out to me if something comes up, and I'm very quick in troubleshooting and getting back to you. Um, yeah.
Good
What an
stuff.
awesome grassroots effort to help people with their mental health. I want, one interesting perspective is that why is Dr. Lida doing this? Because there are no meaningful mental health interventions in her state, and that's true in
Mhm.
many states. You know, why was there no focus on the children? Why was there no focus on substance abuse? Because it seems like the healthcare industry does not really care about that. I Maybe that's a tough thing for people to hear, but I've talked about it on this podcast, and I'll continue to talk about it. I watched the suicide attempts, the hospitalization to inpatient psych units skyrocket. I would also like reflect that idea of I had before the pandemic, like in my whole career in my private practice, two times, three times someone went to inpatient psych, had a full mental break. Then it turned into one or two or three per month during the pandemic. And it's gotten a little better over the last month or two, but it's still like dramatically more prevalent than it ever was. Now I'm starting to see people who are finally coming back after still being so afraid to come and see the doctor. And not just the mental health is off, but their diabetes is way out of control. They haven't taken their blood pressure medicines for 2 years. They haven't seen the cardiologist, so they haven't gotten that heart attack caught. So now they're going to be complicated. Like the fallout from our choices over the last 2 years, it's only just the beginning. So you got to ask yourselves when you're thinking about like, what can I do? What should we do going forward? We've got to start helping each other. We've got to stop being afraid of each other. We've got to stop, being afraid to shake each other's hand or take a mask off. Like, I really think that it's time to start getting back to normal life, because if we don't, this world that we had will be lost, and the children will have a terrible social situation. And we are social creatures, and without normal socialization, things will get very weird, very weird, and they've already started to get weird. So I think um, your message and your mission is maybe the most important mission of all, and I just want to support you in any way we can.
Thank you. Thank you
Yeah, it's
so much. You guys already are. This is huge. I really appreciate you guys giving a platform to me to be able to talk about it. This is absolutely huge. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
before we run out of time. I want to maybe tease your future endeavors. I know that this was a big passion of yours to share your story and to create a platform. Um, this all started actually from something else. So do you want to tease? I don't want to give anything away that you don't want to give away. What are the next offerings from Dr. Lida Fatemi?
Yeah. Thank you for asking, Gary. I would have forgotten otherwise. Um,
Mhm.
I've written one and a half books other than what I'm offering to you guys. This is a short story. This is only 22 pages, I believe. So an easy short read. But the next two books are about conscious life practices plus psychedelics. One is for physicians specifically. That book is written, and um, I'm finding an editor for it. Um, I'm specifically looking at psilocybin and ketamine for this one. Psilocybin being the most natural compound. I mean, we evolved with it, and we evolved because of it. The cognitive evolution that happened for humanity was because of psilocybin, and every prophet, every you know guru that came about, they went into the mountains, and there was 100% some psychedelic experience, and they came back, and now they found some way for humanity to be happier, right? They found a gap, a void that was existing at the time, and then they brought attention to it and they made it better for people. So the first book is specifically for clinicians because of that gap of knowledge that we have in medicine. Now my focus is, psychedelics are part of the lifestyle medicine and lifestyle answer. They're not the whole thing. So before even thinking about dabbling in them, you have to be very rooted and very proficient in conscious life practices, which I go into deeply in my book. What I even mean by that. We talk about meditation, mindfulness, nobody really talks about contemplation, for example. Meditation is, yes, you take the busy thoughts away, and then what happens? You can actually have very creative solutions after your brain waves are now from high beta into alpha. That's where creativity happens. That in delta, like even more creativity. And so being able to understand what that means and give it legs for people is a big one. Having people understand what hydration means and giving legs to it, not just words. Hey, you need to do all exercise. Sure, what does that mean? And I look at Sapien website, and Brian is in the gym. I'm like, yes, he's giving it legs, he's giving it rooting, what it really means to be
Skinny
engaged.
legs. Skinny legs.
I'm doing
They
more
work.
leg days recently.
And so that book goes into that. And then if individuals, after having instilled conscious life practices, after at least a month into their life, let's say now they still want to get deeper into their consciousness and they want to see things, right? Now, is psychedelics enough? Like, you have psilocybin, you have ketamine. It's just, I'm choosing those just because there's a lot more research on those two specific ones right now, and like a literature review that I've done in this book as well, so people can choose for themselves and be like, hey, this is your logical freedom that I'm giving people, and then okay, fine, I use this medicine, what am I doing with it? Am I doing it as an escape, or am I doing it because I want to learn about myself? Am I doing it because, hey, I had some issues in the past and I have had some traumas and I want to unveil those and be able to see those monsters of the past as they were illusions, and I can learn from them and gain gems from them. But doing that takes a lot of support. You need guides, you need therapists, you need coaches, you need psychotherapists, you need people to be there with you who are familiar and have expertise in the field, who can hold you through the time that these things get unveiled from the subconscious. Are you ready to face them? Maybe you're not, and they get unraveled. And then what? And then you have a complete mental health breakdown, which I've seen happen to people, and then they're off, like they no longer have a life. And so to be very cautious and conscious in how we choose to use these medicines is extremely important. And having that support not only from a guide standpoint but also a community standpoint, having females and males, that you trust with all of you, that you can go to when things come up and you're like, fuck, this sucks, like I feel horrible today, like this came up and I don't even know how to deal with it. Or that community, the village is huge, 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 huge. It takes all of us to feel better. It takes all of us to be able to see the illusions for what they are. It takes all of us to be able to get through our traumas.
Amen. I think I can't wait. I haven't had a preview of that book yet, so I can't wait to read it. I think that I've said it before. The future of real mental health breakthroughs is going to be the thoughtful, scientifically driven, and sort of spiritually connected use of
Yeah.
these psychedelics. I think that sometimes people want to present it as just this spirituality component and the history of it being used in traditional cultures, and that's a beautiful part of it. But there is an overwhelming amount of research that, especially for those two drugs, that shows efficacy, that shows safety, that shows protocols. And sometimes I see people talking about just that and missing the spiritual kind of
Yeah.
community oriented approach. I think sometimes people are afraid they're going to get in trouble, so they're just like cautious, cautious, cautious. Oh. Or sometimes they're like, screw it, I'm just going to go all in. I think this is the future. And so having that measured, sort of integrated approach to psychedelics is the only way it's ever going to be meaningful, because this stuff can be dangerous. It could be life changing. This stuff can be very easy if you do it right, and it could be very hard and unpleasant if you do it wrong or if you're not set up for it. So I think the psychedelic revolution is upon us. I think we've talked about that finally people's minds are changing. Thank you, Michael Pollan. And I think that, you know, again, we just referenced a food writer. We need to get to a point where we're referencing health professionals that are guiding
100%.
the way. And I think, one of the interesting parts about that is Michael wrote his book because he's a food writer. He didn't feel troubled saying, hey, I tried this drug. It transformed my life. Hey, I tried this drug. It wasn't so good. These are my stories. When a physician puts themselves out there, they're not going to talk about the personal experience because they're going to be compromising their medical license, even though they're a human being and they have to like experience life. And if you think a doctor just doesn't do anything outside of like doctoring, that's pretty unrealistic. So I still think we have a really long way to go to give people a very clear vision of what psychedelic medicine and psychedelic assisted psychotherapy look like. There's so much more to change about the prior preconceived notions, these ideas that we have from the 50s and 60s, the misunderstandings as a result of the drug war and like all that propaganda, that none of it is true. Like literally none of it is true. Everything we grew up as kids hearing about, oh, the K-hole, or oh, you're going to lose your mind and go wacky, like the actual data doesn't support that. There's truths in there, but not what people commonly think. So we need to keep educating, and we need it to come from special healers and physicians like you. And again, I'm so grateful to you because I can't do it. I'm really busy. I have my platform with Brian. I wish I could spend more energy on mental health. I think it's the most important topic in medicine, period. Like, there's nothing more important. If we can make a dent in mental health, we can help the most amount of people. Even,
Yeah.
and Brian, maybe you disagree, even more than obesity and diabetes through nutrition. While that's so important, I think much of that, at least in the clinical setting, much of those people are actually depressed and
Yeah.
anxious. And it's like, it's a chicken or the egg, did they get
Yeah.
depressed and anxious and then get unhealthy physically, or vice versa? Well, I think if we can really make a dent into mental health, then people will look at what you and me are saying and go, of course, let's, eat a whole foods
Eat
diet
better.
and
Yeah,
intermittent
yeah.
fast food. Like it becomes easy. And I think part of
Yes.
what our challenge is that people are really sad, they're really anxious, they're really worried, they have no coping skills, like none. I teach people about deep breathing and they're like, what? And it's like, come on, guys.
Mhm.
The oldest
Mhm.
trick in the book, right? So I don't know. I love it. We'll have to have you back when that book is ready to go.
Yay.
What else, Brian? What did I miss here?
Well, yeah. So this is super interesting stuff for me because I see it around Austin. Actually, people are calling it transformative medicine. I think it maybe needs a rebranding. I feel like psychedelic has this, oh, yeah, you're just going to drop acid at like Coachella. Like, what are you talking about? So maybe it does need a rebranding. And yeah, there's a lot of research out there. And yeah, I think mental health is super important. And I'm glad Dr. Gary's tackling it and Dr. Lida is in their own way. And yeah, I think you're right, Gary. Food is super important, but it's hard if you're depressed or if you have these deeper issues, you can't stick to the food plan. And
Mhm.
it's like that. Yeah, like your mental state is really, really your essence of your being on a minute by minute basis. And I can see how if you wake up and you feel bad and you go to sleep and you feel bad, how are you going to go do a 20-minute workout? Because I'm here, oh, it's so easy. Go do a 20-minute workout. it's easy for me, but I can get it how it's not easy for someone else. So, yeah, I guess the
Yeah.
mental health is the core of it because that's who you are as a human. But
Yeah.
thanks so much, Dr. Lida,
Yeah.
endchildtorture.com. I'm going to buy the book myself, even though I think you sent it to me for free. I hope everyone out there just buys it as well, shares it. And yeah, this is huge because I've seen this the whole time. Dr. Gare and I have been talking about this for 2 years. What are the unintended consequences? What's going on? In the very beginning of the pandemic, I went to a guy's funeral or a wake at the beach in Venice. He drank himself to death because he was alone and isolated because of lockdown. It's terrible. I knew this was happening. Even I remember the apartment complex I lived in back in LA. People were going crazy. There was yelling, shouting. It was even on mainstream news. My apartment complex, someone like broke a window and like it was this whole thing. Every week there was something going on. Domestic abuse. Like I saw it in my one little apartment building. And so I know it's going on all across
It's
the
everywhere.
nation. So
Yeah.
across the world. It's super important.
Hmm. Hmm.
All right. Any closing words,
And
Dr. Lida?
I do, instead of psychedelic medicines, what I like to use in my work is consciousness expanding medicines. Because that's what I see them do. They just expand the consciousness. If we want to change the name for it. Anyways,
So yes, anything so we don't get tied in with the propaganda stuff from the
Yeah.
past.
yes.
So thank you so much,
Thank you so
Dr.
much for
Gary.
having me.
Thank you, Lida. And I just want to encourage everyone listening. It's such an important message. It's not talked about. There's not a lot of podcasts about this. If this resonates with you, if you have a friend, a family member, a neighbor, anyone who you're worried about, share this podcast. I think it's so powerful coming from a physician, a young female physician. She's sharing her stories. The book can be even the short story could be an outlet for someone to connect with you and with the message. And I just really want, I know people share stuff all the time. This is an important one. This is really, really important. I can't emphasize it enough. So please, if you love it, share it, comment, reach out to me, reach out to Brian, reach out to Lida. Like, do it, you guys. Let's let some people know about this because this is not going away anyway. This is not our last podcast about it either, because we really want to make a dent in this thing. So on that, thank you, Lida.
Thank you for giving me a voice. Really appreciate it. And we're not alone. We are together here. We're not alone. Remember, all you have to do is reach out. That's it.
I love it. Thank you so much. We'll see you.